it's very important because Joe literally craves for company in this chapter. But the thing is, like, she has her mother with her and also her father, but she even says that she wants to try all kinds of love that exist. Like, she isn't really satisfied any longer with only the love of her mother, of her parents, or of her sisters.
The previous chapter called All Alone, there's really this long monologue that she has about how lonely she is and how she longs to find love. And I think she says that her heart is so elastic and that she would like to try what romantic love feels like. And this is such a misunderstood part about Little Woman. We have discussed about this before, that people really do not seem to read the book at all when they talk about Joe wanting to be independent or whatever.
Yes, and to be honest, I think, like, even if a woman, a human, has a partner, it doesn't make them not independent. Like, I mean, relationships can enrich people, and that is the same with in Friedrich. He enriches her, but she still has her independent side, and they live together in a very beautiful harmony.
Yes, and if Joe would have married Laurie, that's when she would have lost her independence completely.
Because Laurie's demanding at that time, especially because we had Richard, were like, you have to take care of me, you are the mother to me, and since that's just what you did, you will take care of me 24 hours a day, and when I'm angry, you will do whatever I want you to, etc. I also think in this chapter, and surprises, she completely forgets to compare British to Laurie, and I think it's also like a funny thing because she has idealized Laurie very much, but in the end, she stayed true to herself, and she fell in love with Friedrich because he is the right man for her. Laurie at that time was a man. He himself states it in that chapter.
Also, in this chapter, there is a apology from Laurie, which I find very feminist thing for Louisa May Alcott to write, but like we have discussed in this podcast, and you and I have discussed this in our private discussions, that this is one of those things that is not in the adaptations either, because Laurie is so incredibly idealized. I think the only version where Laurie apologizes to Joe is the BBC series from 1970s, and most people have not even heard from it. So I am very glad that I get to discuss about the chapter surprises with you today, because I think this is completely overlooked chapter.
Yeah, I agree. It really is a wonder. And I also think this chapter is very important also for the growth of Laurie, because, like, we have seen him evolving and growing and improving, but this is kind of the climax because he not only acknowledges his mistakes to himself and the others chapters, but he also acknowledges it to Joe when he says, I was making a mistake at that time, and I'm sorry, because I think it is, like you said, first of all, very feminist to acknowledge it, that he forced her to being something she was not, but it is also very important because I don't think in many adaptations you don't really see his growth, and it's actually very sad. Like, in some, there is kind of an apology, I guess, but it doesn't really feel right because, I mean, then again, in the movies, it kind of never did anything wrong.
Exactly. Like the proposal scene, it is often romanticized. You don't really see how uncomfortable Joe feels that in the book, the way he's treating her. That's a problem. So his apology in the book makes a lot of sense because Laurie himself realized that it wasn't the right thing to do.
That is true. And I also think it's important that Louisa May Alcott did have Laurie apologize. It is also an ideal way of showing that men can change and better, and that they have to acknowledge it. Like, I think any other author wouldn't have, like, just glossed over it, but I think it is very important that Louisa May Alcott didn't gloss over it, and I think it's also important that Louisa May Alcott did have Joe uncomfortable with Laurie being so possessive of her, because, I mean, who wouldn't feel uncomfortable when their friend would force them to something they didn't want.
Yes, it's kind of interesting because in later chapter, I think it's under the umbrella, Fredrik says that he thinks he knows Jo very well, and that's why he does not force himself to her. Then we have Laurie, who has known Jo since he was 15, and then he tries to force himself on Jo. And you would think that it would be the opposite.
Yes, that is very much true. And I often have to say, I really loved how Friedrich was introduced in New York. And I loved how great his character also is in this chapter, because when he comes to, I think, Orchard House to visit Jo and he sees that she's gone, and he at first doesn't want to go inside because she's busy and all that stuff. But then he stays because Jo looks at him in such a way, and because she just throws him into the house, kind of like she shawls him into the house, and how like he doesn't change for Jo, like he doesn't pretend he is somebody else when he talks to Jo's parents. He is still himself. And I also love that in this chapter he looks at Laurie a great deal, and he also looks at Jo a great deal, and the fact that Jo is like, she has to keep her eyes focused because is afraid that her eyes will look constantly at Swedish is also very funny.
There's something about him that speaks right to her soul. It reminds me of that part in New York when he's speaking about religion, and then I think in that chapter he really becomes Jo's hero. So there's something similar that happens here.
Like I said, I really love Friedrich as a character, and I also love the fact that Louisa May Alcott didn't just like gloss over the fact that Friedrich was visiting her. It was a very important chapter, and it also let the audience know Friedrich even better because he was there for Jo, but he also he wasn't only nice to Jo, he was nice to everybody around her because that is who he is.
You're pretty well educated when it comes to Louisa May Alcott. Would you like to tell a little bit how you got introduced to Little Woman and her writings?
It happened like this. I was kind of craving for reading something in English, and I was like, why not try some classic out? And then it was the first time I kind of discovered it, but there are kind of a few bad reviews, so I wasn't really sure, and I couldn't get a reading extract of it. So I thought to myself, let's wait a bit. But then, when I got to the shop to look for some English book, there again it was, and it was like the whole version of it, like the, I think, 777 pages. And I read a bit into it, and I was like, okay, this is the novel I really want to read. So I started reading this one, and I fell in love with her writing. And then I read her other novels as well, and the one that also had a real big impact on me besides that the When Will Also Work, because it is such an incredible novel about the women. The funny thing with it is, the biggest to the Meg is really how I always imagined my own aunt to be. I have two of them. The older one especially reminded me of her. And
Thank you so much for sharing my love for Little Woman. All the transcriptions of the Little Woman podcast are now available as paperbacks, ebooks, and as audiobooks on Amazon, Kindle, Nook, and bookstores. You can find all the links from the description. And now, back to the show.
that is really thorough. It's in every novel of her, and then there are people who claim that she didn't love him, but the fact is okay, if she only included Henry David Thoreau kind of character in, for example, Little Women, then maybe we could say, okay, she didn't love him, but it is clear that she was very much in love with him or had a crush on him, because that kind of character is in all of her novels. Meg, David, I wouldn't say Tom in An Old-Fashioned Girl is completely like him, but when he matures, he also kind of becomes that kind of archetype. And I think it is really important.
Adam in Moods is also based on Henry David Thoreau.
Yeah, right. I really forgot him.
And then there's the German man in the Queen of Hearts. He's based on Henry David Thoreau. So the list goes on and on. At some point, maybe in this podcast, I will go through all of these Henry David Thoreau archetypes. Yes, you are correct. He appears in literal disguises in pretty much every single Louisa May Alcott novel or short story.
Yes, and also in A Fade to Long Love Chase, I think that's what it's called. It's quite a thriller. And I think that one is also very important because in that one, Henry David Thoreau is kind of his archetype characters. I think Father Ignatius. I don't know, I can't remember his name, but I think that was his name. And he also kind of really reminded me of Friedrich, but I have to say I still love Friedrich more because I think in me, out of all the Henry David Thoreau archetypes, I think Friedrich is the one who speaks mostly to my heart, probably because he's also, because he can talk German. And I always found when he does include two German words, it has English phrases and English sentences, because I'm like, I can understand everything he says, and it is so cute.
Yes, and it's adorable because in Little Woman he is still trying to study English and he speaks with a broken English, and then he throws these German words here and there. Then in Little Man, the narrator says that he has improved his English a lot, but he still uses some of his favorite German phrases like Schatz and mein Son, and yeah.
Yes, that is true. I also have to say, I think it is also very important for him to actually use this kind of, he has a very open vocabulary, I'd say. And I think it is also very important to note that he didn't come to New York for himself. The reason why he came there was to provide for his nephews. And I think it also shows his very caring nature. Thought just came now to my mind. It's also kind of a parallel to Louisa May Alcott when she wants to provide for her own nephews. And I think that was the reason why she even started writing Little Men. She knew she wanted to write another book to the series, but she was like, okay, I have to provide for my nephews because their father just died. And then she wrote Little Men, and that is just so sweet. And it's also a wonderful parallel to how Friedrich came to New York to provide for his nephews, and when he seeks work so he can provide a home for Joe.
That is true. I hadn't thought about that before. That is a parallel between Louisa May Alcott and Friedrich's character. Her brother-in-law, John Pratt, had died before she started to write Little Man.
I also have to say, whenever I read Little Men, I always cry at the passage when John Brooke dies. But again, it is such a great revelation on how caring Friedrich is, because he is very important in the novel Little Men as well. And I just love him even more for that he's so caring and so sweet. And it's kind of funny. I also wrote that to you. It's kind of, it is normally in picture, these kind of characters, the one who are very caring, who are very open about their feelings, who work for loved ones, mostly are actually women in these kind of fictions. And I also think it's very important that Friedrich is a male because he kind of unifies men and women in his character.
Yes, he has very empathic nature that is often considered to be more feminine.
Yes, that's true. But I think for me, I'm not in the age right now, but if there was somebody I'd like to marry or somebody I would fall in love with, that would probably be somebody who's empathetic, who loves me, who respects me. It's of such importance for a person to be empathetic because then the world can evolve with people like that.
And that was such a big deal for Louisa May Alcott. She found it very important that people did feel sympathy to others, especially those in bad situations, because she came from such a poor background herself.
Definitely. And I also think it's very important that, unlike many fans who actually wanted Joe and Laurie to be together, I think it is perfect that you made Joe and Friedrich an official couple, because like in part 1, they are the Hummels, they are German, and besides Beth, I think Joe is the one who cares for them the most. And like I said, they're German, they are poor, and that is the same how Friedrich is. Like, he's German, he's poor, and I think it is also very important that she showed that interracial relationships are important, and that they are like just like marriages between couples that are the same race.
I think still today you can get some backlash if you are dating someone who is not from the same culture than you are, but in those times it was even more scandalous. And then we have Amy and Laurie is half Italian, and Italians were not treated with respect in the 19th century America.
I think his Italian side only shows when he has one of his moods, like when he's angry, or when he's happy, or something like that. Only then do we see that he is Italian. Like, that's not to be a stereotype, but I think it's that people who are from that kind of country, they are very temperamental.
There are some scenes in Little Woman where Laurie mentions how he wants to connect more with his Italian roots, and that I think that's why he's also very artistic. He's interested in music and art and things like that, and to him Italy sort of represents those things. And then I think it has a parallel to Joe, because for Joe, Germany and Goethe and German Romanticism, it really represents sort of high literature, high poetry, theater pieces, and all these great things that come from Germany. So not only is Louisa May Alcott a Germanophile, but Joe is also a Germanophile.
Yes, that is very much true. And I also have to say I love it that both Joe and Louisa May Alcott are very interested in German culture and German language and costumes. I know it came much later, but when you think of World War II, especially, like, for me, it is also very important that a novel at that time portrayed the German culture, German language, etc. as a very good and new thing, because mostly when I now look at movies or something like that, it is mostly propagandic that all Germans are bad, and I think that is a very sad thing, because, I mean, everybody has a good and a bad side inside him or herself, and I think it should be balanced. And I really love that, unlike most people of her time, Louisa May Alcott didn't treat German people with disrespect, but with very much respect, especially because she was a transcendentalist, and transcendentalism is very much inspired by German philosophy that was also stated by Friedrich in the 1994 adaptation. And I also think it's very important to acknowledge the fact that, unlike most people of the time, Louisa May Alcott did love Germany and German people, because diversity is very important and respect is very important.
Hello friends, it is Niina from the Little Woman podcast. Just to let you all know that the Little Woman podcast episode transcripts are now available as books. You can find them as paperbacks and ebooks. They are wonderful reading for all the fans of Louisa May Alcott. You can find all the links from the description.